The courtroom was colder than usual, not from the air conditioning, but from something more deliberate. Judge Howard Gates presided from his high-backed chair like a king forced to deal with petty matters. His gaze never lifted when Karoline Leavitt entered. Instead, he made a performance of shuffling papers, the crisp sound echoing in the chamber like a dare. A signal. He wasn't interested in what she had to say. He'd already made up his mind. Karoline paused at the entrance for just a heartbeat. It was enough. She read the room. The defense team smirking like they already knew the ending, the board reporters half asleep behind their notepads, and the jury barely trying to pretend their minds were open. This wasn't just a courtroom. It was a battleground dressed in civility. She walked forward with quiet purpose, her heels clicking against polished floors like a metronome. Every step was calculated, not dramatic, but firm. She didn't look around for approval. She didn't need it. Judge Gates finally looked up, his face a masterclass in judicial disdain. "Miss Leavitt," he said, his voice syrupy with sarcasm, "I assume you've brought more than your usual flair for the dramatic this morning? Or should we cut straight to the part where you waste the court's time?" Snickers floated up from the defense table. One of the younger attorneys even leaned back in his chair, amused and already dismissive. Karoline stood still, her expression unreadable, not icy, not indignant, just calm, composed. She let the silence hang for a moment, long enough to become uncomfortable. "No, Your Honor," she said finally. "I'm here to make the best use of your time." A few eyebrows rose. A reporter looked up. It wasn't just what she said, it was how she said it. There was weight behind her words, something tightly coiled. She set her briefcase down on the plaintiff's table and opened it slowly. Inside was a folder, nothing flashy, just manila and worn at the edges. But the way she handled it, like it was radioactive, drew attention. People leaned forward as if unconsciously sensing that something had shifted. What no one in the room knew, not even the smirking judge, was that this folder didn't just hold evidence. It held leverage, secrets layered beneath signatures and budget lines. This wasn't just about public funds anymore. It hadn't been for weeks. Karoline had come prepared, and Judge Gates was about to find out just how much. "The plaintiff would like to present the first exhibit," she said, her voice steady, professional. She walked to the projector screen and clicked the remote. A spreadsheet blinked onto the monitor. At first glance, it was nothing remarkable. Rows and columns, numbers. "This shows the approved state budget for the Lawson Development Project, authorized last fiscal year," she said. "The public funds allocated were exactly $2 million. That was the agreed upon amount." Gates leaned back in his chair, already tired. "We've all read the budget, Miss Leavitt." "I'm sure you have, Your Honor. However," she clicked again. A new document appeared. This one was not public, an internal ledger obtained through subpoena. "This," Karoline continued, "is from the defendant's private accounting firm. Their ledger shows a deposit into Lawson Development's primary construction account, not for $2 million, but for nearly $4 million. That's double the authorized budget." The room shifted. A rustle passed through the gallery. The defense lawyer stood slowly, lips pursed, but didn't interrupt. He was waiting to see where she'd go next. Judge Gates narrowed his eyes. "So, what are you implying? That the defendant magically multiplied public funds?" "No, Your Honor," Karoline said smoothly. "I'm saying the additional $2 million didn't come from magic. It came from misallocation, like specifically from other state-funded projects that were quietly defunded within the same quarter." More murmurs. Reporters began to write. Someone in the back coughed, the sound unnaturally loud in the tension. "Still not seeing a smoking gun, Miss Leavitt," Gates said. She nodded, as if expecting that. Then she clicked again. The document that appeared was a disbursement authorization form. The date matched the transfer of funds. The amount matched the overage. And at the bottom of the form, unmistakable even blown up on a grainy courtroom projector, was a signature. Judge Howard Gates. The room didn't gasp. It didn't need to. The silence was louder than any outcry. One of the jurors leaned forward. A photographer's camera clicked once, then stopped. Even the defense team shifted uneasily. Gates stared at the screen, unblinking. Then his lips curled slightly. "That document is inadmissible." Karoline didn't blink. "Your Honor, the document was obtained through legal subpoena, reviewed by the state's forensic document examiner, and entered into the record with verified chain of custody. The clerk's office has the validation on file." "I said it's inadmissible," Gates said again, louder this time. His gavel slammed once. "Strike it from the record. It will not be considered in these proceedings." Reporters stopped pretending not to care. Notepads snapped up. One turned on her recorder. "But Your Honor," Karoline started. "Because I said so." He snapped. That did it. A hush dropped over the courtroom like a curtain. One of the bailiffs shifted uncomfortably. A juror turned to the next, whispering something inaudible. The tension was no longer about the case. It was about what they had all just seen, and the way Gates had tried to bury it. Karoline didn't raise her voice. She didn't have to. "Respectfully, Your Honor," she said clearly, "this is a public hearing. The document is factual, legally entered, and directly relevant to the charges at hand. Your signature authorizes the disbursement of funds now in question. The public has a right to see it." Gates leaned forward, voice low, jaw tight. "You're walking a dangerous line, Miss Leavitt." She didn't flinch. "So are you." That was the moment. The balance in the room tilted. Not with shouts or dramatic declarations, but with something far more unsettling. Realization. The judge wasn't just being difficult, he was being defensive, and Karoline had just made him the focus. This wasn't just a trial anymore. It was something else now. Something bigger. And everyone in the room knew they had just crossed a line they couldn't uncross. Judge Gates didn't respond right away. His eyes locked on Karoline, and for a moment it was no longer a courtroom. It was a standoff. The murmurs in the gallery died. The defense attorneys shifted like they'd realized something wasn't going to plan. Behind Karoline, the projector hummed softly, still displaying the document. The one with his signature. The one he had just declared inadmissible. Not for legal reasons, but for self-preservation. Karoline didn't move. She held her position at the plaintiff's table, a still figure amid the rising storm. She knew what this was now. Not a hearing, not a routine ethics case. This was a war of influence and perception, played out in front of 12 jurors, 2 bailiffs, and 6 increasingly alert reporters. "Bailiff," Gates said finally, voice slow and cold. "Turn off that screen." The bailiff hesitated. Karoline turned to him. "Respectfully, the document is evidence entered through standard procedure. Interfering could constitute obstruction." That was the first time the word had been said aloud. Obstruction. It hung in the air like smoke. The bailiff froze, eyes darting between the judge and the woman, now suggesting, carefully but clearly, that obeying the judge might be illegal. Reporters perked up like bloodhounds catching a scent. Judge Gates stood, not with his usual pomp, but with visible tension in his shoulders. His black robe shifted like a shadow around him. "This court," he said, slowly enunciating every syllable, "will not be used for political theater." "No one's asking it to be, Your Honor," Karoline replied, "only for it to be used for justice." That line did what she hoped it would. It landed. She didn't need to raise her voice, just speak truth into the silence Gates was trying to control. The judge clenched his jaw. "The court will recess for 20 minutes. Gavel, slam, the kind that tried to end something rather than pause it. He turned and strode toward his chambers, robe billowing behind him like a warning shot. As soon as the door clicked shut, the gallery erupted in hushed chaos. The defense table huddled together, whispering rapidly. Reporters pulled out phones. Jurors stood up, some speaking to each other for the first time all morning. Karoline remained motionless, her fingers resting lightly on the edge of the plaintiff's table. She watched it all, not gloating, not celebrating, just measuring. She had struck the first blow, but there would be more, because the file, the one Gates had tried to erase from existence, was only the beginning. Behind her, a quiet voice spoke. "You just declared war on him," said Ava Moreno, Karoline's assistant counsel, barely above a whisper. Karoline didn't turn. "He declared it the moment he tried to erase the evidence." Ava swallowed, eyes on the closed chamber door. "You think he'll recuse?" "No," Karoline said. "I think he'll double down." And she was right. 21 minutes later, Judge Gates returned. His face was composed, but his eyes weren't. He looked through Karoline like she was an obstruction he was going to bulldoze. The gavel came down sharply before anyone could speak. "This court will reconvene," he said. "The jury will disregard the previous exhibit." Karoline stood. "Respectfully, Your Honor, the jury has seen the document. They cannot unsee your signature." "I will remind you," Gates snapped, "this is my courtroom." "And I'll remind you, Your Honor," she replied calmly, "that it is a public courtroom operating under the authority of the people and the Constitution. The law does not belong to any one man." He glared at her like he wanted to hold her in contempt. And maybe he would, but not yet. He couldn't afford the optics. Not now. Not after what the jury had seen. Not after the media and the gallery had started to record every word, every glance. So instead, he sat down and folded his hands, hiding the tremor in his fingers beneath the weight of ceremony. Karoline turned back to the jury. "If I may continue," she said. No one objected. She changed slides. A new exhibit, a cross-reference between budget reallocation locations and known political donors, names, dates, wire transfers. Nothing illegal on the surface, but damning when viewed in sequence. These funds were not just misallocated, Karoline said. They were redirected toward private contractors with direct ties to campaign committees. These projects were billed under emergency infrastructure needs, none of which passed public review. She didn't look at the judge while she spoke, but she felt his eyes burning into the side of her head. Moreover, she continued, several of these contracts were fast-tracked with a signature from a senior judicial official, granting exemption from standard procurement protocols. That signature appears, consistently, to be Judge Howard Gates there. The second blow. She had warned him. Now she was showing her hand, and she still had cards left to play. A hand in the gallery went up. A journalist. Young, glasses askew, phone recording from his shirt pocket. "Miss Leavitt," he said, "are you accusing the judge of corruption?" The room inhaled. Karoline met his eyes. "I am presenting evidence that raises serious ethical and legal questions about the role Judge Gates has played in public fund mismanagement. Whether that constitutes corruption, I'll leave to the appropriate authorities." Another inhale. Another blow landed without theatrics. Gates leaned forward. "This court is not a press conference." "No," Karoline said, "but it is a place where the truth must be heard, even if it's inconvenient." The judge opened his mouth to reply, but the bailiff interrupted. A small note had been passed from the hallway. He handed it to the judge discreetly, but the impact was anything but. Gates read it, blinked once, and stiffened. Karoline knew what that meant. Someone higher up, a chief judge, maybe the Judicial Oversight Board, had just become aware of the morning's proceedings, and they were watching now. That changed the tone of everything. Gates looked at her again, but this time, his expression had shifted. Not just anger, not just defiance. There was calculation now. Strategy. He wouldn't lash out again. Not yet. He'd pivot, regain control. "Court will recess until after lunch," he said, carefully neutral. "We will reconvene at 1:30. All parties are instructed not to speak to the press during this time." The jury stood, the reporters buzzed, and Karoline, she watched the judge rise from his chair like it was heavier than it had ever been before. She knew he wouldn't go down without a fight, but she hadn't come to play it safe. She had come to finish what she started. Afternoon light poured through the high windows when court resumed, casting long shadows across the floor like scars. Karoline Leavitt stood quietly at the plaintiff's table, her hands folded, waiting. The air was different now, tighter, charged. The jurors returned more alert. Reporters no longer looked bored, and Judge Howard Gates looked tired. He entered with a performative solemnity, but the edge was gone. There was no more venom, no sarcasm, just calculation. He wasn't acting like a man in control anymore. He was acting like a man under scrutiny. "Court is back in session," he said, eyes low. "Proceed, Miss Leavitt." No preamble. Karoline clicked the remote again. The next exhibit appeared, a string of internal emails between Charles Lawson, the developer, and senior members of the governor's office. In them, they discussed timelines, adjusted figures, and, most damningly, judicial fast tracks for funding authorization. In one email, Lawson had written, "Judge Gates is on board. Signature won't be a problem." The room stayed silent, but tension pulsed through it. Karoline looked up. These emails were recovered from a server obtained via federal oversight request. The metadata confirms the sender, timestamps, and recipients. "Your Honor, these are not opinions. They are facts. She didn't say your name is on them. She didn't have to. Everyone saw it." Gates adjusted his robe. "And what does the defense have to say to this?" The defense attorney stood slowly, face pale. "Your Honor, we move to request a recess for a motion to dismiss." "On what grounds?" Karoline asked, already knowing the answer. The defense lawyer hesitated, then said, "On grounds that the impartiality of this court has been compromised." That was the moment, not a bombshell, a quiet implosion, because in those few words, the defense admitted what everyone already suspected. Judge Gates had become a liability. Even to the people he once protected. Gates froze. The mask slipped for just a second. He realized what had happened. He wasn't untouchable anymore. Karoline stepped forward, measured and clear. "I second the motion, Your Honor, but I request one additional step, a formal motion to have you recuse yourself from these proceedings, effective immediately." Gates stared at her, jaw locked. "On what authority?" Karoline didn't blink. "On the authority of documented evidence, Judicial Code 3.7a, and the clear conflict of interest now established in this courtroom." On public record, the courtroom waited, the bailiff shifted, the clerk looked uncomfortable, even the jurors stopped pretending to be impartial, their faces tense with anticipation. Gates exhaled slowly, then with a motion so reluctant it almost hurt to watch, he removed his glasses. "I will grant the motion to recess," he said, "and I will consider the motion to recuse." "Respectfully, Your Honor," Karoline said, "it's no longer a request. I've already filed a formal complaint with the Judicial Oversight Committee. As of 12:42 p.m., they've received the documentation you've seen here today, along with evidence not yet submitted to this court." He turned to her fully now, eyes narrow. "What else?" "A sworn affidavit from Charles Lawson," she said, "received under immunity agreement this morning. He's prepared to testify, and not just about the funds, but about the years of judicial leniency your office has provided in exchange for campaign donations and undisclosed real estate holdings." There it was, the final card, the one she had saved for last. Gates sat back down, slowly, carefully, as if the chair might reject him. The courtroom was silent, not stunned, but expectant, because everyone watching knew what was happening. Power stripped bare. The facade was gone. There was no gavel that could fix this. Karoline looked up, meeting the jury's gaze. "Justice," she said, "should never depend on who signs the checks." And with that, she returned to her seat. No mic drop, no victory grin, just silence. It lasted for a long moment before the bailiff stepped forward and handed the judge another note, this one from the state court administrator's office. Gates read it. His hand trembled. "This court," he said, voice barely audible, "is adjourned pending reassignment, effective immediately." He stood, robe trailing behind him, and walked out. No words, no gavel. Just a man retreating from a battlefield he could no longer control. The room erupted, not in chaos, but in movement. Jurors spoke to one another freely now. Reporters ran from the gallery, phones pressed to their ears. The defense table stood motionless, as if their trial had ended before it ever began. Ava Moreno leaned toward Karoline. "It's done." Karoline didn't answer at first. She looked down at the now closed file, the one she had walked in with that morning, the file that had changed everything. "Not done," she said finally, "just begun." Ava tilted her head. "You're not talking about the trial." "No," Karoline said, "I'm talking about the system." Because Judge Gates was only one piece, one domino, and now that he'd fallen, others would follow. She stood and gathered her things. The folder went back into her case. The projector powered down. The screen faded to black. But what had been revealed? Signatures, secrets, power that wouldn't fade. As she walked out of the courtroom, the hallway beyond was filled with cameras, questions, and chaos. She stepped into it like someone stepping through fire, unshaken, prepared. They asked if she had a comment. She didn't give one, because she didn't need to say anything more. The truth had already spoken, and this time, it had been heard. If you like this video, then subscribe.